Karen called the HOA on me for illegal crypto mining, convinced she'd caught me red-handed. But she didn't know I investigate money laundering for a living. Now I'm tracing her accounts. Guess what I found? It started with a knock on my door, sharp, rapid, impatient. Not the kind of knock you give a friend. It was the kind that carries judgment before a word is even spoken. I already knew who it was. Karen Thompson, president of our HOA, queen of the clipboard, destroyer of neighborhood joy. I opened the door, and there she stood, arms crossed, lips pursed like she'd been sucking lemons all morning. Her eyes scanned me like a barcode. I didn't even get a hello. "Mr. Taylor," she said, flipping open a faux leather folder. "We've received reports of excessive power usage from your property, possibly related to unauthorized equipment." I stared at her, confused. "You mean like my air fryer?" She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. "Your garage," she said. "Several neighbors have noticed a strange humming noise at night. It's been described as industrial." Now I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Karen had taken nosy neighbor to a whole new level. "I work late," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Sometimes I run servers in there. It's all legal, nothing dangerous." Karen raised a brow. "You'll need to provide a written statement to the HOA board. We're reviewing possible fines for zoning violations, electrical overuse, and operating a business from residential property." I should have closed the door right there. But I didn't, because something in her tone, smug, rehearsed, almost gleeful, told me this wasn't about the hum. This was personal. She handed me a bright yellow notice like it was a golden ticket. "Violation, Section 12.4, excessive utility consumption. Possible safety risk. Immediate compliance required." I didn't even know that section existed. I'd read the HOA guidelines cover to cover after the barbecue incident 2 summers ago when Karen tried to ban charcoal grills. "I'll take care of it," I said flatly. "See that you do," she snapped, turning on her heel like she was exiting a courtroom she just won. I watched her walk back to her house, phone already in hand, probably filing a second violation before she hit her driveway. As I shut the door, I looked down at the notice in my hand. It wasn't just a warning. It was the opening shot. She thought she'd uncovered something, some secret operation. A neighborhood villain hidden behind a garage door and a surge protector. She had no idea. She didn't know what I actually did for a living. She didn't know why I tracked energy patterns. And she definitely didn't know that the real crime wasn't happening in my garage. It was happening in her bank account. She just made a very dangerous mistake, and I was going to let her walk right into it. Karen saw wires, blinking lights, and a steady hum. To her, it looked like a villain lair. To me, it was just another Tuesday night. The unauthorized equipment she mentioned? 6 high-efficiency rigs running Ethereum validators, a few GPUs for legacy altcoins, and a climate-controlled server rack humming like a content beehive. The hum she was so concerned about? It was quieter than my neighbor's pool pump. What she didn't know, and would never bother to ask, was that everything in that garage was legal, efficient, and tax documented. It wasn't even mining, not anymore. I'd moved past that phase years ago. I was running secure nodes, testing encrypted smart contract layers, and auditing chains for vulnerabilities. I wasn't in crypto for quick profit. I was in it to catch the people who were. That's the part Karen would never wrap her carefully highlighted head around. Because when I wasn't in my garage, I was working for a division of the Financial Crimes Investigation Bureau. Yeah, the boring acronym people call FCIB. But on paper, I was the guy who traced dirty money, shell companies, laundered crypto, ghost wallets. If you ran a scam in this state and used blockchain to wash it, odds are I already had your name on a sticky note. Karen thought I was her next HOA villain. In reality, she just stepped into a trap I'd spent the last 15 years building. My job gave me access to public records, financial transaction audits, and yes, even the power to trigger asset freezes. Not unilaterally, of course. There were procedures. But with the right flags? Let's just say things move fast when you know where to look. The funny thing is, I didn't even care about the HOA. I'd stayed quiet for years. Let Karen issue her little warnings about mailbox colors and grass height. Let her patrol the streets like a suburban dictator in yoga pants. But now she was making it personal. And personal is how people get sloppy. She wanted to treat me like a criminal? Fine, let's do it by the book. I pulled up my home dashboard on my phone. Wattage was within normal residential range. Every unit was certified, documented, and well under the safety threshold. But her notice mentioned possible business activity. So I checked the clause she cited, Section 12.4. It hadn't been used in over a decade, and I noticed something strange. It was added via amendment. A recent one, too recent. That's when a thought hit me. What if she planned this? What if this wasn't about noise or power at all? What if Karen was trying to frame me, to hide something of her own? Because if there's one thing I've learned from years of chasing criminals, it's this. The loudest accuser is usually trying to cover the biggest lie. It started small, almost laughable. First, I noticed her car parked across from my house more often. Always the same time, right after sunset. Engine running, lights off. I figured maybe she just liked the view, or the drama. But then came the photos. I'd step outside and hear that telltale click. Karen crouched behind her bushes like some bootleg wildlife photographer aiming her phone at my garage. Once she pretended to walk her dog, except she doesn't own a dog. She just strolled past holding an empty leash and snapping pictures through my side gate like she was casing a joint. It would have been funny if it wasn't so desperate. And it kept escalating. I started finding notes on my mailbox, handwritten warnings, no signature, just things like, "You are being watched," and "Illegal operations won't be tolerated in our neighborhood." I say started finding because they came almost daily. That's when I knew it was time to shift gears. This wasn't about a violation anymore. This was stalking, harassment. So I did what I've done my whole career. I documented everything. Security cameras went up, silent, wide angle, infrared. I set motion alerts to ping my phone anytime someone came within 30 feet of the house. Karen must have triggered them 17 times in 5 days. I compiled it all. Photos, video clips, timestamps. Every time she parked and pretended to stretch. Every time she accidentally wandered into my yard to inspect landscaping compliance. She even tried to peek through the crack in my garage door once. That footage would have been comedy gold if it weren't so disturbing. I created a folder on a private drive titled KT Escalation, just like I would with any financial suspect. But this one lived next door and wore platform sandals. Then came the weirdest part. One night around 11, I heard footsteps on my side yard. No knock, no lights, just the faint sound of someone walking on gravel. I flicked on my monitor, and there she was, Karen, holding a flashlight and a measuring tape. She was measuring the air vents. I watched from my office chair, stunned, as she carefully jotted notes into her little pink planner. Then she pulled out what looked like a radiation detector. No joke. That's when I stopped watching and started speaking. I turned on the intercom system and said, "You're on private property, Karen, and you're being recorded." She froze. The flashlight slipped. Then she bolted like a teenager caught sneaking out. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to, because now I had more than enough to press charges if I wanted to. But I didn't call the police. Not yet. I had a better plan. Let her keep digging. Because sometimes, when you let someone chase a lie long enough, they lead you right to the truth they're trying to bury. The invitation came in a crumpled envelope, shoved halfway into my mailbox, like even the paper didn't want to be part of this mess. Emergency HOA meeting, bold red letters across the top. Subject, unauthorized activities and community safety violations. Time, 7 p.m. Location, Karen's driveway, of course, because when you're the self-declared HOA queen, your driveway becomes the courthouse, city hall, and public execution stage all in one. I almost didn't go. Almost. But then I remembered something my mentor once told me back when I was tracking cartel money through fake charities. If they want a show, give them one. So I showed up. Black jeans, casual shirt, calm face. Just another homeowner, right? But inside my messenger bag was a leather folder labeled HOA Discretion Abuse Evidence Log 1. It included Karen's stalking footage, timestamps, her bogus citations, and something even better, a copy of her most recent financial disclosure for the HOA budget. More on that later. Neighbors had gathered by the time I arrived, folding chairs and clipboards like they were expecting fireworks. Karen stood front and center in her red power blazer, the same one she always wore when she was about to bulldoze someone's dignity. She saw me, smiled that fake politician smile, and cleared her throat. "Let's begin." She didn't waste time. "Residents," she said, "we have serious concerns regarding Mr. Taylor's property. Specifically, abnormal power usage, potential illegal business operations, and risk to community safety due to unknown electrical installations." She gestured to a series of low-res photos clipped to a cardboard display like she was presenting a science fair project. Photos of my garage door, my utility meter, one of me unloading a sealed box of server fans that she dramatically labeled suspicious cargo. She turned to me. "Would you like to respond?" I smiled. "Sure." I reached into my bag, pulled out a crisp folder, and handed a copy to every board member. "Here's documentation of my utility bills for the last 12 months. All paid, all within standard variance." A few murmurs. "Here's a copy of my equipment certification from the fire marshal. And before you ask, yes, it's signed." Karen's smile faltered. "And here," I said, "is a notarized letter from my accountant confirming that I don't run any business from this residence. But if you're still unsure, I'd be happy to let a federal investigator take a closer look." Karen crossed her arms. "This doesn't explain the noise, the secrecy." "Secrecy?" I raised an eyebrow. "Karen, my garage door has windows." Someone laughed. I didn't look to see who. "I'm curious," I said, flipping to the last page, "about the $12,000 budget line you added for community beautification consulting. Care to explain who approved that? Or where the check was sent?" Now everyone turned. Karen blinked. She hadn't expected that. She thought this meeting was about me. She didn't realize she was the one being watched all along. And this? This was just the opening argument. Karen always had this thing, this flair, for pretending to be smarter than she was. That night, standing under her driveway's string lights with her little slideshow and smug expression, she tried to spin me into some kind of suburban criminal mastermind. "Multiple server racks," she read aloud, like the words alone were damning. "Unusual delivery frequency, encrypted hardware, energy surges recorded in neighboring circuits." She paused dramatically. "These are textbook signs of illegal crypto mining." I let her speak. Let her build her little mountain of nothing. Let the neighbors squirm, unsure which way this would go. But while she rattled off her misinformed theory, something started to click in my head, something far more interesting. Because what Karen described, it wasn't just paranoid HOA gossip. It was projection. The accusations, the fake authority, the need to be seen as in control while quietly hiding the real operation. I'd seen this before. I'd investigated this before. Overseas luxury consultant who cried fraud when his competitor reported a cash-only art gallery. A beach club owner who filed noise complaints to distract from his undeclared offshore holdings. Karen wasn't just being petty. She was using my garage as a distraction from her own paper trail. And her behaviors? Classic markers, sudden bursts of influence, controlling the board's finances with little transparency. Multiple budget lines marked discretionary with no itemized receipts. And the kicker? That $12,000 beautification expense I'd found? It had been paid to a consulting LLC based in Delaware. An LLC that had no online presence, no employees listed, just a P.O. box. The same pattern I'd seen in laundering cases a dozen times before. Set up a clean-looking company, funnel HOA money into it under vague project names. Transfer it again. Then, boom, it's consulting revenue, completely untraceable to the casual eye. But not to me, because I've hunted this kind of thing on 6 continents. And Karen, she just gave me a front row seat to her own undoing. I looked around the meeting, neighbors unsure, whispering, trying to read the room. They didn't know who to believe. And that was okay, because truth doesn't need applause. It just needs time. I didn't interrupt Karen's rant, didn't flinch when she shouted about fraudulent energy usage and suspicious tech activities. Because while she saw a guy with blinking lights in his garage, I saw something far clearer. A woman who built her little empire with fake rules, fake fines, and just enough fear to keep people quiet. Until now. Until me. Because she thought she was exposing a criminal. But all she really did was point the flashlight back at herself. It was almost too easy. Late one night, I was scrolling through our neighborhood's private HOA message board, a place where complaints went to multiply and logic went to die. Karen ran the thing, of course. She moderated every thread like it was a courtroom, deleting posts that questioned her authority and highlighting anything that made her look like the neighborhood's savior. But she couldn't control private messages. And that's where the cracks started to show. Someone had tagged me in a thread titled "Suspicious Activity, a Pattern." It was a mild post from one of the newer residents, a retired teacher named Denise. She asked why HOA fees had gone up twice in the past year with no visible improvements and wondered aloud, politely, how the money was being used. A few neighbors chimed in, mostly guessing, but one comment caught my eye. It was from an account with the username j.mills49, a name I'd never seen before. Their message was simple, almost lazy. Karen's got that offshore thing through her husband's business, all legal, I'm sure, LOL. That LOL was doing a lot of heavy lifting. The post was deleted less than 3 minutes after it went live, but not before I screenshotted it, and not before it sent my brain racing. Offshore. Her husband. Funny thing is, I'd never seen her husband. Not once. His name was on the deed, but no one in the neighborhood really knew him. Rumors floated around. Some said he traveled for work. Others said he was in finance, maybe crypto. Nobody seemed sure. But I was. Because that name, David Lennox, had crossed my desk once before. 2 years ago. In a flagged report from the Bureau involving layered transfers through Caribbean shell accounts. At the time, the activity hadn't risen to the level of prosecution. Too murky. Too spread out. But now, paired with this, it was worth revisiting. I opened my secure portal and keyed in the access request under Internal Audit Review. Transaction records, asset declarations, foreign interest disclosures. 2 minutes in, and there it was. A quiet little firm registered in the British Virgin Islands, LXT Consulting Group. Guess who was listed as the co-owner? Karen Lennox Thompson, our very own HOA queen. And the address they'd listed was the same Delaware P.O. box tied to the HOA's beautification payments. Suddenly, it all connected. Karen's frantic need to control the narrative, her obsession with my garage, the fake noise complaints, the desperate meetings, the accusations. She was building a smokescreen, trying to distract everyone, from the neighbors to the tax auditors, with stories about illegal crypto setups and energy drains. But now I had a thread, and I knew exactly how to pull it. Because once you spot the offshore whisper, you just have to follow the current. And Karen? She'd been swimming in dirty water for a very long time. I didn't need a warrant. Not yet. Everything I was doing was public, available to anyone who knew where to look. The problem is, most people never bother. But I do. While Karen paraded around with her clipboard and cryptic notices, I spent my evenings combing through city databases, tax filings, corporate registries, every dry, dusty trail most people would ignore. To me, it was a map, and Karen had left breadcrumbs all over it. The first thing I checked was the HOA's nonprofit filing. Basic stuff, boring stuff, until I saw who signed the latest financial reports. Karen, of course, but not just as president, as treasurer. That's a red flag. Dual roles in financial management violate most HOA charters. But I didn't stop there. The reports listed 3 vendors receiving annual payments, a landscaping service, a community consultant, and a tech firm handling security infrastructure. None had phone numbers, no websites, no contact names. So I ran their LLC names through the state registry. And there it was, All three were registered under the same agent, K.L. Thompson Holdings, LLC. Karen. Again. It wasn't even subtle. She was billing the HOA, our neighbors, for services her own shell companies were providing. Probably inflating the prices, definitely pocketing the difference. Classic self-dealing, classic laundering setup. It's what we call vertical concealment. Create the need, approve the budget, hire yourself. I traced the payments from the HOA's bank records, which were public thanks to a state disclosure requirement. Every quarter, like clockwork, funds flowed out to these dummy vendors, roughly $10K here, $8K there. And then I noticed something else. Around the same time, Karen had started her smear campaign against me. The payments had stopped going to the Delaware P.O. box. Now they were being wired to an international bank in the Cayman Islands. That was the point. I leaned back in my chair and said aloud, "Oh, Karen, you really thought no one would notice." I pulled up the HOA's meeting minutes for the last 6 months. Doctored, light on detail. No budget approvals, no open votes. Karen had stopped documenting anything she couldn't control. That wasn't just sloppy, it was illegal. And now I had everything I needed. Dates, vendor names, payment amounts, the Shell LLC connections. If she'd just left me alone, I probably never would have looked. I was content running clean servers and keeping to myself. But she came for me. She accused me. She poked the wrong quiet guy with the wrong job. I closed my laptop and stared at the stack of papers on my desk. The evidence wasn't a maybe anymore. It was real, and it was loud. Karen wasn't just abusing her HOA power. She was defrauding an entire neighborhood, and now I was going to show her what real exposure looks like. There's a difference between curiosity and authority. I'd been curious long enough. The moment I confirmed that Karen was wiring HOA funds through offshore shells tied to her personal LLC, this stopped being a neighborhood feud. It became a case, and I made it official. Monday morning, I walked into the Bureau's satellite office with a folder thick enough to need its own paperclip ecosystem. My credentials got me through security. My evidence got me into the right room. I didn't lead with the drama, didn't mention the HOA or Karen's clipboard theatrics. I led with numbers. Unauthorized transfers from nonprofit community funds, I said, laying out copies of quarterly statements. Funds rerouted to shell vendors tied to the HOA president's own LLC. Then I dropped the Cayman Islands routing info and the Delaware Incorporation docs on the desk. The investigator across from me, a guy named Harris I'd worked cases with before, lifted an eyebrow and nodded slowly. "You want this flagged?" he asked. "More than that," I said. "I want it on the watch list, suspicious activity reporting priority 2. That's not small. It means we now had reason to monitor all connected accounts, all linked financial activity, without needing full judicial clearance. Yet, it's how we catch criminals before they know they're suspects." We pulled in a digital forensics tech to trace the routing patterns. More offshore accounts showed up. Cyprus, Malta, and one buried under 4 layers of Canadian shell corporations. It was sophisticated. Too sophisticated for Karen alone. I already knew what that meant. Someone else was helping her, likely her husband. Possibly more. I added both their names to our internal persons of interest file. We started pulling transaction flags using keyword triggers: HOA, vendor, reimbursement, beautification, consulting. It wouldn't trigger arrests. Not yet. But every time they moved money, someone would see it. And if they tried to move too much too fast, the freeze would hit like a sledgehammer. By noon, we had enough to issue an internal memo to financial crimes enforcement teams in 2 regions. Karen Lennox Thompson had officially entered the system. And she had no idea. That's the part that always gets me. These people build their empires on arrogance. They assume no one's watching because they've always gotten away with it. Because they hide behind rules, fine print, and fake smiles. But the thing is, when you hide money in shadows, even a flicker of light will reveal it all. I left the office that day feeling a different kind of calm. Not relief, just clarity. The wheels were in motion now, and Karen, she wasn't on a clipboard anymore. She was on a federal watch list. And this quiet little HOA drama, It had just become a financial crimes investigation with teeth. It came together faster than I expected. That's the thing about tangled webs. Once you find the right thread, you don't need to pull hard. They unravel themselves. Harris called me late Wednesday night, excitement humming under his voice like static. "We got a hit," he said. "I think you're going to want to see this." I was in my car before he hung up. 15 minutes later, I was back in the Bureau's data lab, staring at a massive screen filled with transaction lines and color-coded tags, red for domestic, blue for international, yellow for flagged crypto wallets. The board looked like a rainbow of corruption. At the center of it all, Karen's Delaware LLC. It had received over $210,000 in consulting fees over the past 3 years from a mix of HOA accounts and private transfers. Most of those funds had been routed through a shell landscaping company, on paper. But the landscaping company? It had no trucks, no equipment, no employees, just a single wallet ID tied to a crypto exchange based in Singapore. That wallet had moved funds through 3 chains, swapped currencies, and then cashed out into another account, one we traced directly to Karen's husband. The name matched. So did the IP address. They weren't just laundering HOA money. They were using it to buy and flip crypto assets anonymously. Bitcoin, Ethereum, even privacy coins like Monero. But here's the thing. Nothing is truly anonymous when you know what to look for. The breakthrough came when we linked Karen's LLC email used for HOA correspondence to a coin node registration, one that had verified her identity with a scanned driver's license. It was like finding a signature in a ransom note. Sloppy, careless, desperate. We cross-checked HOA meeting minutes and budget approvals, what few she actually logged, with the dates of the major transactions. Every large payment coincided with a meeting where Karen proposed a beautification initiative or emergency infrastructure repair. Each one passed with no vote. Each one routed through her own shell companies. Each one followed by a crypto transfer within 48 hours. It was all right there. Dates, dollar amounts, wallet IDs, bank records, LLC filings. An entire fraud ecosystem wrapped in community service buzzwords. And the kicker? One of the exchanges she used required a KYC check. She'd submitted a photo holding her driver's license, smiling, like it was a passport photo. We had her. Fraud, wire transfer violations, money laundering, tax evasion. And she still thought I was just a nosy neighbor with a noisy garage. I sat back and let the pieces settle. This wasn't a hunch anymore. It wasn't just a personal grudge or a bad HOA feud. It was federal crime. Documented, time-stamped, and traceable. I looked at Harris. "She's done," I said quietly. He nodded. "Let's get ready for the next step." Because next time Karen stood in front of a crowd holding one of her little binders, I'd be holding a federal case file. And she wouldn't be walking away from that meeting. I knew she'd try something. Karen was too proud to go quietly, too addicted to the performance. So when the bright yellow flyers showed up on every doorstep, emergency HOA meeting, urgent community security concerns, I didn't even blink. I knew exactly what this was. She was going to make one last stand. The email was more dramatic than usual, dripping with phrases like public accountability, unregistered activity, and my personal favorite, ongoing federal investigation, which was ironic because the only federal investigation happening in this neighborhood had her name on the top of the file. But I played along. I showed up 10 minutes early, front row, calm as a monk. Karen wore red again, her war color. She stood at her podium like a general about to launch a siege, flipping through a stack of manila folders as neighbors trickled in with folding chairs and plastic cups of lemonade. "I want to thank everyone for coming on such short notice," she began with that tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We're here to discuss a threat to our community's safety and integrity." She looked straight at me. A resident has been conducting unregulated crypto operations that may violate state and federal codes. These activities pose a potential hazard and reflect poorly on our neighborhood's reputation. A few gasps. One neighbor shifted uncomfortably. Karen flipped to her slideshow, blurry zoomed-in photos of my garage, heat maps she clearly didn't understand, and screenshots of Reddit posts that weren't even mine. She was grasping. But she didn't know this wasn't my first rodeo. And tonight, I came loaded. I stood up slowly when she called for community input, cleared my throat, and opened my own folder. "Thank you, Karen," I said, voice even. "I'd like to present some clarifications." I handed packets to the board members, each one labeled Verified Audit Trail, Lennox Thompson HOA Disbursements. Inside, everything. The shell companies, the payments, the crypto wallet IDs, the Cayman Islands routing numbers, even her CoinNode selfie. I connected my laptop to the projector, no one stopped me, and brought up a live demo of the transaction chain. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, clicking through the slides, "Karen has been using your HOA dues to fund a personal laundering scheme. These aren't accusations. They're bank-verified movements of your money. This isn't about crypto rigs or noise complaints. This is about theft." Dead silence. One of the board members coughed. Another pulled out their phone. Karen didn't move. Her fingers clenched the edges of her podium so tightly her knuckles turned white. I turned to her slowly. "And, by the way, the ongoing federal investigation you mentioned?" I pulled out my badge. "You're absolutely right. There is one. I'm the one who opened it." Gasps broke through the silence. Someone dropped their drink. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. And just like that, her empire of fake rules, fear, and pocketed dues collapsed. Not with a bang, but with a file folder and a projector. It took her a full 10 seconds to speak. Karen's lips moved like she was trying to swallow words that wouldn't go down. She glanced around the crowd, hoping someone, anyone, would jump in, defend her, interrupt me. But no one did. The neighborhood had gone still. All the eyes that used to look to her for decisions, permission, approval, now looked at me. I don't understand," she stammered, her voice suddenly a full octave higher. You're not law enforcement. You're just some guy with wires in his garage." I held up my badge again. "My name is Nathan Taylor, Federal Financial Crimes Investigator, 17 years in the field, 7 years focused on digital laundering and crypto fraud, and for the past 4 weeks you've been under quiet observation." The words dropped like weights into the silence. "Observation?" she croaked. "You accused me of operating illegal crypto activity," I said, pacing a step closer, letting my voice settle. "But what I found was far more interesting. 3 shell companies registered to your name, 2 international transfers routed through unlicensed vendors, a crypto wallet tagged to LXT Consulting, a company you co-own with your husband, and $210,000 in missing HOA funds gone without a vote or a receipt." One of the board members gasped. "You're lying," Karen hissed, but her voice cracked. This is harassment. You're trying to discredit me." I didn't flinch. "Then explain this." I clicked the projector to the next slide, the CoinNode verification screen. Her face, her name, her ID, smiling like she was about to take a vacation with someone else's money. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another neighbor just stood up and walked away, shaking their head. Karen's facade began to crumble in real time. The straight spine, the sharp tongue, all of it wilted. "You all know me," she tried to say, hands shaking. "I've always acted in the best interest of this neighborhood." "No," I cut in. "You acted in the best interest of your wallet. You weaponized HOA bylaws to cover up your own fraud. You staged accusations to draw attention away from the accounts you hoped no one would find. And you bullied your neighbors into silence." I looked around the crowd now. To anyone who paid a mysterious fine, to anyone who got charged for a landscaping fee that never happened, check your statements. Because she didn't just break trust, she stole from every one of you. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, heavy with realization, betrayal, and that slow burning rage that only shows up when people realize they've been used. Karen stepped back from the podium, eyes darting like she was searching for a trap door that didn't exist. But there was no exit this time, not for her, only a reckoning. And it had finally arrived. It didn't take long for the story to explode. By the next morning, someone had uploaded the entire meeting, projector slides, badge reveal, Karen's meltdown, to the local community group on Facebook. By noon, it had crossed into Reddit. By evening, it hit YouTube under the title, HOA Karen Gets Exposed by Federal Agent in Front of Entire Neighborhood. 500,000 views in 24 hours. The comments were brutal. This is the HOA justice we needed. Why is it always the one with the clipboard? She really thought she could outsmart a Fed. It should have felt like vindication, and in a way, it did. But mostly it just felt overdue. Because once Karen's grip cracked, the truth came flooding in. At first, it was whispers, private messages, a knock on my door here and there. But soon, people stopped whispering. Denise, the retired teacher, came by first, said she'd been fined 3 times in 1 year for excessive porch decor, a ceramic owl, and a hanging fern. I paid without fighting it, she said, eyes down. I thought I was the problem. Then Mr. Jacob shared how he'd been charged $300 for a mailbox Karen claimed was not up to code, even though she personally approved the color 6 months earlier. It was a test, he said. She wanted to see who'd push back. I didn't. Even Eliza, a nurse with 3 kids and barely enough time to sleep, told me how Karen charged her an emergency landscaping fee while she was working 80-hour weeks during the pandemic. I didn't even know until I saw my HOA bill spike. When I asked, she said it was a clerical error. But it never got refunded. Story after story, small fines, weird fees, convenient violations that always benefited Karen, or quietly vanished if you stayed on her good side. What struck me most wasn't the money. It was the way people had internalized the control, how they'd adjusted their lives, their homes, to avoid her attention. Karen hadn't just scammed them financially. She'd made them afraid to exist freely in their own space, and that was the real theft. People began showing up to board meetings now, actually reading the HOA rules, voting, asking questions they never asked before. Some apologized to me, others just said, "Thank you," like they didn't have words for anything else. But the moment that stuck with me most came from Mrs. Castillo, the oldest resident on the block. She'd lived here since before the HOA even existed. She came to my porch with a tin of homemade cookies and tears in her eyes. "She made us feel small," she said, "and you made her feel human again, not above us, just human." Karen had tried to build a kingdom. What she didn't count on was that her subjects had memories. And now they had a voice. The clipboard was gone. Karen didn't show up to the next meeting, or the one after that. In fact, she didn't show her face at all after the federal agents came knocking with a warrant and a polite but firm invitation to answer a few very uncomfortable questions. Fraud, wire transfers, misuse of nonprofit funds. The charges were stacking up faster than her violation notices ever did. Her house went quiet. No more morning patrols, no more driveway stakeouts. Just silence, and a very "for sale by owner" sign planted awkwardly in the front lawn. But the real work had just begun. The neighborhood was tired of being tricked, manipulated, ignored. So when the interim board called a vote to rebuild the HOA from scratch, people actually showed up. We gathered at the community center. No podiums, no theatrics, no Karen. Just folding chairs, coffee in styrofoam cups, and neighbors who finally wanted to be heard. I didn't run for the board. I didn't need to. But I helped write the new charter. No dual roles, no unchecked budgets, term limits, transparency, every decision documented, every vote recorded. We created a public ledger for HOA spending, an online dashboard anyone could access. You want to know where your dues are going? 2 clicks, and you're there. And the best part? People cared, not out of fear, but out of hope. They weren't trying to avoid fines anymore. They were trying to build something better. Eliza joined the board along with Mr. Jacobs and Denise. People who'd been pushed around finally had a seat at the table, and they took it seriously. We even reinstated the annual block party Karen once canceled for liability reasons. There were homemade tamales, bounce houses, lawn chairs, and for the first time in years, laughter. Real, relaxed, nothing-to-prove laughter. Neighbors talked, kids ran wild. Someone brought a Bluetooth speaker and blasted old Motown until the sun dipped behind the rooftops. And for a moment, standing there with a cold soda in one hand and the hum of conversation all around me, I realized something. This place finally felt like home again. Not because the rules changed, but because we did. We stopped letting fear run the block. We stopped mistaking silence for peace. As for Karen, last I heard, she was cooperating fully with investigators. Her accounts were frozen, her influence gone. She'd built her power on fine print and fear, but she underestimated the one thing she couldn't control. What happens when the quiet ones push back? The garage still hums at night. The lights still blink. But now no one calls it suspicious. They call it peaceful. Because that sound? That's just me, running secure servers. Nothing shady, just a man who kept his head down. Until it was time to rise, and help the rest of the neighborhood rise with him. Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. If this story hit home, or made you think twice about who's really pulling the strings in your own neighborhood, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever dealt with a power-hungry HOA, or uncovered something shady hiding behind the rules? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every one. And if you learned something, felt that little spark of justice, or just enjoyed watching Karen's empire unravel piece by piece, consider subscribing. It helps more than you know, and it keeps these stories coming. Until next time, stay sharp, stay grounded, and never underestimate the quiet guy with a plan.